He listened to the neighbors' houses.
I've been thinking about something that happened a long time ago. Not by accident. I can't stop thinking about it, actually. It all started when I came back to my hometown after being gone for almost 12 years. I'd left back in 2010 to study in the capital and eventually put down roots there. My parents had stayed a few more years after I graduated, then relocated to another city. They never sold the apartment, rented it out through my mom's sister. Now they'd finally decided to put it on the market, and since they'd since moved abroad, I was the only one who could handle it. So I took time off work and came back to the place where I grew up, a place I hadn't set foot in for over a decade. When I first arrived, I felt this strange mix of emotions. On one hand, nothing tied me to this city anymore. On the other, every street corner was a crack in the pavement through which old memories came bleeding. Warm, but often sad. One of the sadder ones is where this story really begins. My childhood fell across the late 90s and early 2000s. I was an ordinary kid, nothing special about me. One of about 20 children who ran wild through our apartment block. Our town was an industrial one, drew young families, had a sense of community. Our neighborhood was genuinely nice. Good neighbors, and a kind of unspoken pride in belonging to something real. It was normal, back then, to sit at a neighbor's apartment after school, waiting for your mom to get home. People left keys with each other. My sense of home wasn't limited to my own yard. It stretched across the whole quarter. It was on one of my childhood wanderings into a neighboring yard that I first saw Gorbushka. His real name was Igor, but all the local kids called him Gorbushka, hunchback. He was a harmless local eccentric, heavy-set, somewhere between 40 and 50, who lived 5 buildings down, in a courtyard that never seemed to get any sun. He lived with his elderly mother. He was always in a hurry, always rushing somewhere, and on the rare days he wasn't, he'd just circle his building all day long. When we saw him, we'd greet him by name. At 10 years old, that felt cool for some reason. He always greeted back. The local residents treated him with warmth and compassion. He wasn't sick in any dangerous way, more like he had developmental delays, maybe a childhood head injury. His speech was heavily distorted. He didn't say words so much as exhale them. Hello became hello. How are you became how ya. You could follow him if you tried, but you could never tell if he was asking or stating, addressing you or someone else. He always looked just slightly to the side of whoever he was talking to. He even had a kind of humor, simple and guileless. He lived on disability, but somehow always managed to buy treats for the stray cats who lived near the neighborhood boiler room, tucked between some garages. He'd find cardboard boxes, stuff them with old rags, clumsily tack plastic sheeting and tar paper on top. Sometimes we'd help him build these little shelters, hauling scrap and junk to the spot where he was working. Those are warm memories. Then my recollections jump forward a few years to a strange and slightly frightening episode, one that started everything. I can't remember exactly what year it was. I only know I was being punished for some small infraction. No computer, no TV, no going outside. While all my friends were running around in the street, I was trapped at home, dying of boredom. Even a week's worth of house arrest felt like a lifetime to me then. To survive it, I'd sit for hours at the window, watching for any familiar face passing through the yard below. Just a glimpse of someone I knew made it bearable, gave me some thin hope that my parents might randomly soften and set me free. So I kept my watch. Usually nothing happened. On those punished days, my friends all seemed to vanish, Just slow old ladies drifting past, and then nothing. The view from my window frozen on pause. In those moments, I'd find myself silently begging for something, anything, to happen. And something did. Just not what I would have wished for. I had my chin resting on my folded arms, already resigned to another empty half hour, when Gorbushka came around the corner of the neighboring building. That building was positioned oddly for our district, slightly sunken into the earth, sitting in a kind of shallow depression. Gorbushka came around quickly, walked to the corner where the building entrances were, glanced down the passage, then turned and looked behind him. He pressed his ear flat against the wall. He stood like that for about 10 seconds. Then, with the same hurried step, he walked to the next building. Same thing. Glanced around, made sure no one was watching, pressed his ear against the wall. Then on to the third building, the last one I could see from my window. He checked around him again, leaned in, and this time he stood there for almost a full minute, until 2 passing women startled him and he moved on. I spent the rest of that day in a kind of daze. My kid brain generated every possible question and answered none of them. At one point, I pressed my own ear against the wall of my bedroom. I stood there thinking about what he could possibly have heard. The next morning, I was at the window again before breakfast, but now I wasn't waiting for my friends. I was waiting for him. Nothing happened until afternoon. Then there he was, the same quick stride, same darting look around. This time I saw him take something from his pocket and move it across the wall before going on to the next building, where he repeated the motion more slowly, like he was carefully writing something. At the third building, a man coming out of the entrance scared him off, but Gorbushka came back an hour later, finished whatever he was doing, and left for good. My punishment dragged on for a few more days. He didn't come back during that time, but I burned to see what he'd been writing on those walls. The moment I was finally let outside, I ran straight to the neighbors' buildings and started scanning every brick. Nothing. I went over every inch of every surface. I was about to give up when I spotted it. A small, faint chalk drawing on one brick. A sun. Just a circle with a few lopsided rays. On the next building, after another long search, a crude chalk flower. On the third, a smiley face, 2 dots for eyes. Each drawing was tiny, the size of a single brick. I felt cheated. I'd expected secret codes, spy ciphers, something adult and mysterious. Instead, a sun, a flower, a smiley. I told some friends what I'd seen. Instead of the laughter I expected, they got weirdly interested. One kid from my building started walking along the base of our apartment block, studying each brick. At one corner, he let out a shout. We all ran over. A small chalk pine tree. That lit something up in all of us, and we spent the rest of the afternoon hunting for Gorbushka's marks across every building in the neighborhood. By the end of the day, we'd found about 10 more drawings. I still remember some of them. A star, a fish, a moon, an apple, a piece of candy, a ball, a cat, a coin, an umbrella. The last one was a simple medical cross, like a pharmacy symbol. Word spread fast among the local kids. For a while, no one touched the marks. Then, inevitably, someone started drawing obscene doodles next to them. The usual childish garbage. But the vandals got bored when no one reacted, and Gorbushka's symbols kept appearing. That summer, I saw him 2 or 3 more times, pressing his ear to buildings. Always during the day, always in a hurry. About a week before school started again, a friend of mine suggested we follow him. It sounded so impossible and thrilling that I said yes immediately. We spent 3 mornings sitting on a bench near my building, watching the houses he usually listened to. On the 3rd day, we got lucky. We saw Gorbushka dart around a corner, glance around, and start toward the first building. We got up casually and walked in his direction. As he moved to the 2nd building, we accelerated and made it to the 1st. From there, we tracked him cleanly. He finished his 2nd mark and went to the 3rd. We hid around the corner. After that came 3 more buildings in our block that I couldn't see from my window. We followed him building by building, slipping around corners. Then he crossed the road and ducked into a neighboring district's courtyard. More buildings, more marks, more frantic sprinting to keep up. For what must have been an hour, we shadowed him through yards we'd never been in before. And then, instead of heading toward more apartment blocks, he turned toward a half-collapsed building, half swallowed by overgrowth, sitting in the middle of a block. He picked his way carefully over loose bricks toward the center of the ruin. My friend went in without hesitating. I froze. The building felt cold and damp and wrong. I followed slowly, stepping over rubble, and only realized we were descending into a basement when it was already dark around me. After the bright daylight, the darkness was absolute. Then I heard Gorbushka's voice, that strained, exhaled speech of his, urgent and earnest, telling someone something. We moved toward it. As my eyes adjusted, I saw him standing a short distance away, backlit by the flickering glow of candles, facing a crude structure built from bricks and debris, something like an altar. He was gesturing and talking with great animation. We crept closer and started to listen. "Nina's dog is sick. Draw her a heart?" "Yes. Good. Thank you." "Aunt Katya went to her sister's. She wants to make up. Let there be a son for her?" "Dima listened well to his mother today. Give him a candy?" "Good. Big thanks." I began to understand. He was reporting what he'd heard by pressing his ear to the buildings, little slivers of the lives inside. And whatever he was speaking to was listening, approving. The hearts, the sons, the candies, those were gifts, marks of protection and blessing. But who was he talking to? I leaned further around the corner. My friend tried to hold me back. I think he'd already seen something that frightened him. I only caught a fragment, a slow-moving silhouette, large, and from it, something falling. Like dust or grit, streams of it trickling down. That's all I had time to see. A small piece of slate cracked under my foot. Gorbushka spun around. Still facing the silhouette beside him, he said, "No, they good boys. Don't touch them." We ran. We stumbled back through the dark basement, crashing over heaps of brick. My friend grabbed at the wall for balance and went down hard into a pile of concrete rubble, taking his outstretched arm with him. He didn't even pause before starting to sob. By the time we made it back to our courtyard, his ear was covered in blood that kept spreading. I said whatever reassuring things I could manage. By some mystery, word of our adventure reached the entire courtyard by evening, including my parents. I was grounded again. My friend was home with a concussion, recovering. A few days later, when my parents were at work, I called him. His mother answered, then reluctantly called him to the phone, as if it were all my fault. When he came on, I asked what he'd seen down there. He said, "Seen where?" I thought his mother must be standing right next to him, so I let it go. When school started, I finally saw him in person and brought it up again. He had no idea what I was talking about. It wasn't an act. Talking to him face to face, I could see clearly. He simply didn't remember. Not the building, not the basement, not the silhouette. Nothing. Every question I asked bounced off a wall. Life went on. I occasionally spotted Gorbushka pressing his ear to buildings, occasionally saw his small chalk drawings. And then gradually, as I grew older, he just faded out of my awareness. I'd see him and nod, but he stopped registering. By the time I was 16, I can barely remember a single moment involving him. That's when the sad part of this story begins. At 16, I barely hung out in my own yard anymore. We'd moved on to improvised hangout spots, cards, beer, trying to impress girls. One afternoon, I came home to change and walked into a cluster of screaming voices. The whole courtyard was gathered around a bench. On it lay a small kid from the next entrance over, covered in blood and grime, unconscious. Two of his friends stood nearby, shaken. Behind them loomed Gorbushka, his clothes smeared with blood and dust. The boy's mother came flying out moments later. She was a type I'd known my whole life, but never liked. A family that had moved into our building a few years back. The kind that never greeted neighbors in return. The father had some position at the pension fund. They ran a clothing import business. They had money, and they knew it. The moment she saw her son, she had someone to blame. "Who did this? Everyone step back! Who did this?" Without stopping to ask a single question, she threw herself at Gorbushka, who stood frozen, still trying to process what was happening. "You did this! You did this!" Neighbors pulled her off him. Gorbushka, muttering something, started to shuffle away. "Stop him! Call the police!" That day I knew. Something ugly had started, and it was only going to get worse. I cornered the boy's two friends and told them if they didn't tell me the truth, I'd make them regret it. So they did. The unconscious boy, that little monster, had a hobby. He liked filming Gorbushka on his phone. He liked filming himself throwing green apricots and stones at him. Liked getting filmed giving him a shove, a smack on the back of the head, dousing him with a 2-liter bottle of soda. The footage was extensive, spitting, cursing, chasing, and none of the adults in our neighborhood had any idea, because the kid always caught Gorbushka alone, in garages or dead-end lots or abandoned buildings. Today had been another chase. They'd driven him into the ruins of a building, and the description those kids gave matched it perfectly. The building where, years ago, I'd seen Gorbushka in the basement with his altar and his silhouette. The little monster had found the altar and immediately started demolishing it. As the last brick fell, chunks of ceiling plaster began to rain down on him. Gorbushka had tried to shield him with his own body, but he was already unconscious. Gorbushka picked him up and ran him to our courtyard. What followed tore the neighborhood in two. The boy woke up the next day, terrified of being punished for going somewhere he'd been forbidden to go. He told his mother that Gorbushka had grabbed him and dragged him into the basement. That Gorbushka was a maniac, a predator. I watched the boy's enraged mother march down the street with the local police officer. I watched the father stand below Gorbushka's window and yell up at it with theatrical fury. I saw Gorbushka's frail, exhausted mother come out to face them. I watched the father's wife shake her by her collar while he leaned over the officer, loudly referencing his connections. They left eventually, but they didn't stop. I knew Gorbushka was innocent, one of the most harmless people I'd ever encountered. and I thought of his marks on the walls. I went back to our building and walked the perimeter. I found a small chalk plus sign, a pharmacy cross, on one of the bricks. Even after everything, he'd blessed the boy's building. Even after years of abuse. It shook me. I decided to find the footage on those kids' phones and show the neighborhood the truth. I approached one boy's father outside the entrance, told him everything. He said, "I wouldn't go up against their family. They have connections." The father of the boy found me one morning as I was taking out the trash. He came up from behind, put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Hey, everything good? I hear you've been asking around, looking at videos?" His arm slid from my shoulder to my neck. He lifted me slightly off the ground. "Listen carefully. If I hear you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong one more time, it's going to be very bad for you. Understood?" A neighbor walked by. His voice became cheerful in an instant. He dropped me, greeted her warmly, and walked away as if I didn't exist. I stopped trying. What followed was the slow destruction of a man's life. He was banned from the neighborhood store. "Get out of here, you animal." Then the second store. To buy a loaf of bread, he had to take a bus halfway across the city to the market. His mother was by now barely mobile and needed medication constantly. The pharmacies wouldn't serve him either. The women behind the counter would simply look through him. When he started traveling to the far side of town to shop, flyers appeared there too. "Attention, dangerous predator," with his photo. Those flyers went up across our neighborhood too, but most of us tore them down whenever we saw them. Other people weren't so measured. When strangers spotted Gorbushka near their buildings, they drove him off with curses. He stopped coming. He stopped pressing his ear to the walls. He stopped drawing his small marks. And when he stopped coming during the day, something else started coming at night. I saw it twice from my window. A figure standing where Gorbushka used to stand, leaning against the buildings. But it wasn't Gorbushka. The silhouette was too tall, too thin, and yet hunched. It pressed its entire body against the walls. And from it, something fell. Dust or grit trickling down. Then it would move toward the next building, toward the places where the entrance lights barely reached, and dissolve into the shadow. The last I knew of Gorbushka, he had been surviving off garbage for months, barely leaving his apartment. Then one day, he and his mother were simply gone. They'd sold the flat quietly and disappeared. I never saw him again. I don't know if he's still alive. I don't think I could find 5 people from that time who'd even remember him. It was all so long ago that trying to recall it feels hallucinatory, like the memory of a dream. I might have believed that's all it was, if not for what I saw yesterday. I was walking back from the notary, turning the corner toward my building, when I noticed a small chalk drawing on one of the bricks. A pair of scales. A balance. The classic image of justice. That was what made me sit down and write all of this. After I got home and steadied myself, I went back out to look at the other buildings. What I found on them sent a cold spike of dread through me. A coffin. A cross. A noose. A match. A knife. A figure with its legs cut off. A face with its eyes crossed out. A tooth. The word death. The word pain. The word horror. The same tiny chalk marks. The same size. The same careful hand, but with different contents. I knew they weren't Gorbushkas. I sat at the window again that evening, just like in childhood, watching the buildings across the way. And the figure came. Every evening it came, pressing itself against the walls, then moving on to the next. In the mornings, there were new marks. When I tried to photograph one of them, a woman came out and snarled at me to get away from her building. When I tried on the next street, an old man emerged from the entrance and asked what I wanted. He was calm, and I told him everything. The marks, what they'd meant years ago, what Gorbushka used to do. He listened in silence. Then he looked at me as if trying to place me. "We erase them every day," he said. "But it doesn't always help. It listens to our houses anyway. It always knows everything." He smiled. "I'm sorry. Who does? Who is it?" His face became even more unnaturally cheerful. "Maybe me," he said. "Maybe you." He went still and looked at me. And in that moment, I had the sensation of speaking to a very realistic stuffed version of an old man. His eyes held nothing. Soft, milky darkness. White midday light all around and a creeping cold inside me. I backed away. I kept him in my field of vision. I never saw the moment he started moving again. Back home, I looked out the window toward his building. I didn't see the old man. I saw something else. A black luxury car parked where we used to play football as kids. A tall figure stepping out of it. For a moment, I thought it was the boy's father. Then I realized it was the boy himself. Grown now, well-dressed, expensive coat, all the arrogance of a man who has never once been held to account. He disappeared into his entrance. And then it all assembled itself at once. The scales on our building. Scales. Justice. It doesn't just take, it wants to settle something. It wants what's owed. I looked him up that night. He wasn't just some rich kid anymore. He was a city council member for one of the districts. And the stories that came back to me over the years, stories I'd ignored because I'd cut this city out of my life, suddenly became sharp again. How he'd gotten a girl to drop her assault complaint through family pressure. How they'd been drunk driving and hit a taxi driver following all the rules. The driver became disabled, no charges ever filed. In his social media profiles, the same expression in every photo. Nothing will ever happen to me. The plan came to me almost immediately. It felt like it had always been there, waiting in some back room of my mind. I needed to lure him to that building. I understood that once he went down there, he wouldn't come back out. But I had no idea how to connect those 2 points. The answer came to me like a gift. A news article about people who steal license plates from cars and then extort a ransom to reveal their location. I left my phone at home. I walked to the market and bought a cheap second-hand smartphone from one of the stalls. A power bank too. A prepaid SIM. I activated it. I walked to the ruined building, Gorbushka's building, and hid the phone, wrapped in a bag, under a couple of bricks near the basement entrance. The next day, I wrote down the monster's contact number, found online. And then I waited for the longest night of my life. I sat at the window, watched the lights in distant apartments going out one by one. Watched the figure lean against a wall across the way, then move to the next, then vanish into the dark. When the clock passed 5 in the morning, I went out. His new car had magnetic license plates. They came off easily. I crossed to the ruined building, retrieved the phone, connected the power bank, turned it on. took a few photos of the plates, entered his number, sent the images, then sent a message, a mocking note, an offer to collect his property at a place he'd remember, the ruined building, the basement, the altar he'd destroyed as a child. The messages showed as read instantly. He started calling the number back. I sent one last message. You have 15 minutes. Then I disconnected the battery, snapped the SIM, and scattered the pieces. Before I left, I threw the license plates into the mouth of the basement. They clattered off the rubble in the dark. For just a moment, I could see them. Then something large, something shaped like a limb, reached from the darkness and pulled them inward. I hid in some bushes and waited. He didn't walk. He ran. Jingling, keys or change. His hands already spread wide, like he was ready to grab someone. He paused in the doorway of the basement, pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, and stepped inside. He was only down there for a minute before the sounds began. He screamed, he wailed, he howled in pain. I pressed my head between my shoulders and walked away. His screaming followed me almost all the way home. For a week afterward, I kept hearing it, especially when I walked past the neighbors' buildings. Near them, my ears would start to pick up a faint vibration. I'd press my ear to the wall, and I could hear him screaming. And somewhere deep in me, I understood. He would be screaming for a very long time. Maybe forever. After that, the marks on the building stopped appearing. It seemed to me that for the first time in 12 years, something had finally shifted in this neighborhood. Something that had been stuck, frozen in place since the day Gorbushka left, had finally moved. Life resumed. I sold the apartment. I left my hometown, and this time I left it for good.